Well, I went ahead and put the tin work on, distributor, fuel pump, heater boxes. I figured everybody knows how to do that, just to catch up on things while I was waiting for the carburetor and the fuel pump to come in too. I took my flywheel out this afternoon and had it resurfaced. If you have any doubts about your flywheel, you should have it resurfaced. Before you do, check your dowel pin holes, make sure they're not beat out or anything. Clean out all your dust holes so that they're not clogged. And when you have your flywheel resurfaced, always have the part where the clutch bolts to resurfaced also, to keep everything at standard. If you have it resurfaced more than once, you're going to change your adjustment drastically on your clutch cable. So always have this surfaced along with this part where your disc rides. Also make sure that you clean the groove out good in here for your O-ring that fits inside. The later flywheel 12 volts all take an O-ring instead of a paper or metal gasket, along with your flywheel seal, which goes in your block. Now tomorrow I'm going to put the flywheel on and set up the endplay. Then she'll be ready for starting. I'll show you how to set the endplay and hook up a remote starter and run it on the floor and test it. And one of the things I do when I start an engine is hook up a oil pressure gauge, spin it over without starting it until I get oil pressure. Gauges are cheap enough to buy, maybe 10 bucks. You can even buy used ones for $1 or so. So what I do is I screw it into the end of a brake hose, and then the other end of the brake hose screws into the case, right where your oil pressure gauge goes. And you have a nice gauge for testing your oil pressure before you try and start the engine. Okay, we're going to set up the endplay. These are the shims you use. You always use 3 of them. And mic the shims so you know where you're starting at, in case you have to add or subtract. You want 4 to 6 thousandths endplay. I put a magnetic dial indicator on the flywheel and have it touching the back of the case, and we set it to 0. So now I'll pull the crank forward using 2 screwdrivers on the back pulley. Then I'll come back here and pull the flywheel the opposite way and see what our endplay is. Okay, I'm going to take my 2 screwdrivers, put them behind the pulley, and pull the crank towards me. Now we'll take a reading. Let's say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thousandths. So now I'll check the back. Then I'll pull the crank the opposite way and see what we end up with. Back to 0. So we end up with 5 thousandths endplay. which is good. If you don't have the 4 to 5 thousandths, you have to mic your shims again and replace the shims until you get the correct amount of endplay. That's all there is to it, really not too much. Now I'll take the flywheel off and install the flywheel seal. I will also take grease and grease this bearing, the pilot bearing that rides on your transmission main shaft. Be sure to do that and check it that none of the bearings are loose or broken before you reinstall it.